Week 9 of college football was the week of almost upsets. We had Mississippi State almost beat Texas, South Carolina almost beat Alabama, Missouri almost beat Vanderbilt, North Carolina almost beat Virginia, and Oklahoma almost beat Ole Miss. But for some teams, it was a week of statement victories. We'll talk about all of that and more, but please make sure you like, comment, subscribe. Let's go ahead and get right into it, starting with a game that I thought would be the game of the week, and that's Texas A&M versus LSU. A&M didn't just win in Death Valley. They dominated. The Aggies rolled LSU 49-25 in a game that honestly wasn't even as close as it sounds. One of those LSU touchdowns came in garbage time. What makes this result even more shocking to me is that LSU actually led at halftime. But in the second half, A&M exploded, scoring more points in two quarters than LSU's defense had allowed all season. And the scary part is it could have been even worse. A&M turned the ball over twice, including once in the red zone, committed more penalties, and still ran LSU out of their own stadium. The Tigers' offense completely collapsed again. They couldn't run the ball, and once again, they asked Garrett Nussmeier to do literally everything himself, and he just couldn't keep up. Meanwhile, A&M was firing on all cylinders, racking up over 200 yards through the air and 200 yards on the ground for a total of 426 yards and 49 points. And they didn't even have their starting running back, Le'Veon Moss, in this game. Marcel Reedy continues to look like one of the best quarterbacks in the country. Defensively, the Aggies were just dominant. They smothered LSU's already struggling offense and flipped the atmosphere of Death Valley against the home team. Not something you see too often. Just an incredibly impressive statement win that solidified A&M as a legitimate national title contender. They've now proven they can win in multiple ways: blowouts, tight defensive battles, you name it. They are as battle-tested as anybody in the country, and that's why they are going to be my number one team in my rankings later this week. For LSU, this loss was the breaking point. Head coach Brian Kelly and offensive coordinator Joe Sloan were immediately fired after this game, and honestly, it was long overdue. Kelly was never the right fit in Baton Rouge. Reports suggest he was disengaged, self-focused, and he clashed with the culture and his staff. The on-the-field product reflected this dysfunction: no offensive identity, constant miscommunication, and a team that just looked completely lost. Sloan's firing was even less surprising. He was clearly in over his head, and Kelly's decision to bring him on was one of his many missteps. LSU's offense needs a total rebuild, and their next head coach will have to reconnect this program with its roots: physical football, strong culture, and accountability. But for now, this night was all about the Aggies. Texas A&M walked into one of the toughest environments in college football and weaponized it against LSU. That's what elite teams do, and I picked this game correctly. I expected A&M to win. Didn't expect it to be by this much, but they got it done. Moving on to South Carolina versus Alabama, and Cocktober is officially canceled. South Carolina goes winless on the month, and it really felt like this was finally going to be the game that they broke through right up until the final 2 minutes of the game. For most of the night, South Carolina had Alabama on the ropes. The game was tied late. The Gamecocks had the ball near midfield, and it looked like they were setting up for a potential game-winning field goal. But then, in true Alabama fashion, Kalen DeBoer found another miracle. They forced a fumble, recovered it with a short field, and once again, they closed it out. That's kind of become DeBoer's signature since arriving in Tuscaloosa and his time at Washington. His teams just keep finding ways to survive even when they don't play well. Because make no mistake, this was not Alabama's best effort. Ty Simpson looked pretty average most of the night. The passing game really struggled with Isaiah Horton limited and Ryan Williams. He had a few key drops, and the run game was also just non-existent. South Carolina's defense actually did a really nice job of containing them and making them earn every yard they got. And that crowd, they were electric. Williams-Brice Stadium was rocking, and this was exactly the type of spot where Alabama teams under Kalen DeBoer have typically struggled. The tough road game against an unranked and unmotivated opponent. For a while, it looked like the history was about to repeat itself, but somehow, some way, Alabama found a way to survive again. They're not blowing people out like past Alabama teams have, but they close out games, and that counts for something. Now they head into a much-needed bye week, sitting in great shape. As for South Carolina, this one definitely hurts. They played about as well as you could ask for a team with their limitations. They had a tough defense, smart game plan, and they went really toe-to-toe with a top team for nearly 4 quarters. Now for that fumble, I genuinely think South Carolina wins this game, but that's football, and that's Alabama. The Gamecocks shouldn't have even given them a chance to come back late, and it came back to bite them. Still, they showed a real fight, and while they didn't win the game, this is one of their biggest performances of the season, one of their best at least. Fortunately for them, there's one team this weekend that managed to throw away a win even harder, and that's Mississippi State. And if you know any Mississippi State fans, please check on them. Nobody deserves this kind of torture. These losses just keep getting worse. First, it was the overtime loss to Tennessee. Then it was the Florida game where they threw the ball in the red zone instead of running it out and kicking the game-winning field goal. And now this, Texas came into Stark Vegas with cowbells blaring, and Mississippi State absolutely dominated the Longhorns for 3 quarters. They were up 31-14 heading into the fourth quarter, and that place was rocking, and it felt like they were finally going to get that statement when they needed. But as the saying goes, it's a 4-quarter game, and Mississippi State couldn't play all 4 quarters. Texas somehow scored 24 points in that fourth quarter alone, more than they've scored in any Power 4 game this season, and came all the way back to win the game 45-38 in overtime. It was one of the craziest comebacks I've seen in a long time, if ever, in college football. For most of the night, Mississippi State's defense was flying around, and offense looked explosive against the Texas defense that's really been elite all year. Texas looked dead in the water, no rhythm, no confidence, nothing was working. But then, out of nowhere, they somehow found life. Once it hit overtime, you could just feel it. Texas was going to win the game. Mississippi State had nothing left in the tank, and the Longhorns took full advantage of that. Texas may honestly be the worst 6-2 team in the country. They don't look the part at all, but somehow they just keep surviving these games. Meanwhile, Mississippi State is stuck living in heartbreak. They just are so close to being a one-loss team, but instead they're sitting here with 4 losses. It's brutal. It's unfair, but it's college football. Moving on to Missouri versus Vanderbilt, and I was actually at game day for this one, and man, what an incredible experience. We basically camped out there all night until they let us in, so I was running on fumes. It's also why I have this, my voice has gone a little bit because I was screaming and having a great time there, but it was totally worth it. Plus, I got this free t-shirt here, so I'm counting on that as a win too. As for the game itself, Vanderbilt got the win just like I predicted, but it was very close, an absolute defensive battle from start to finish. I felt a little bad for Missouri with how this played out. They were already without their standout tight end, Brett Norfleet, and their kicker, and then as the game was tied, they lost their starting quarterback for the season, forcing them to go to their third string and burn the red shirt on true freshman Matt Zollers. And honestly, Zollers played pretty well given the situation. In fact, I think Missouri might actually be better off with him moving forward. He's definitely more of a passing threat than Pabula ever was, and he looked composed for a kid that was just getting thrown into the fire. Statistically, Missouri actually outplayed Vanderbilt across the board, more yards, more time of possession, but this game came down to red zone execution, and Vanderbilt won in that area. They forced field goals and stops when Missouri got close, and they capitalized when it was their turn. So Vanderbilt picks up another top 15 win and continues to shock people. Clark Lee has his program in conversations it's never really been in before. And Diego Pavia didn't have his best night statistically, but he made throws when it mattered and did enough to get the win. Congrats to the Commodores. You did not let me down. Moving on to Ole Miss versus Oklahoma, and it's another matchup I predicted exactly right. And if you remember my preview, there were 2 matchups I said would decide this game, and both played out pretty much perfectly to script. The first one was Ole Miss's run defense versus Oklahoma's rushing attack. Ole Miss has not been able to stop anyone on the ground all season, and Oklahoma hasn't been able to run the ball on anyone all season, so something had to give. Ole Miss was not perfect, but they were dang close. They gave up one big run for 65 yards, but outside of that, Oklahoma only managed 70 yards in the entire game, and they were never really able to get anything going consistently on the ground. So if Oklahoma still can't run the ball against this Ole Miss front, they're not running it on anyone. The second matchup I was watching was Lane Kiffin's explosive offense versus Brent Venables' elite defense, and this one wasn't even close. Point to Lane Kiffin, because Ole Miss shredded at Oklahoma defense. They made one of the best units in the country look like Swiss cheese, on the road no less. Trinidad Chambliss continues to impress. He looks fantastic right now. Kawan Lacey came up clutch in big moments, and the Rebel offense just keeps rolling. Sure, Ole Miss has some defensive struggles. They're vulnerable. We all know that. But their offensive firepower is just good enough to beat anybody. Even though the score looked respectable in the end, it really never felt like Ole Miss lost control of the game. Another big win for Lane Kiffin and the Rebels. Moving on to Memphis versus USF, and this was honestly the most disappointing game of the week for me because I was really rooting for the Bulls. A lot of my family's from Tampa, and they went to USF, so I was hoping they'd stay in the driver's seat for the Group of 5 race, but unfortunately, they took this one away on the road against Memphis. USF actually led for most of the game. In fact, they had a 17-point lead going into the fourth quarter, but they just could not hang on to it. They missed a field goal at the end that sealed their fate. It's really frustrating because they actually played really, really solid overall. The offense was balanced. The defense looked sharp for 3 quarters, and then everything unraveled in that final stretch. Tough loss for the Bulls, no other way to put it, but they're not completely out of the playoff picture yet. Memphis still has to play Tulane next week, and Navy faces North Texas. So every team that USF is competing with for that top G5 spot could easily take a loss this weekend. Things are about to get really interesting in that G5 race. Moving on to Virginia versus North Carolina, and Virginia almost blew their chance at an ACC title game appearance last night against Bill Belichick's North Carolina team, but they managed to pull away with a win in overtime. This game was way closer than it should have been, but Virginia just keeps finding ways to survive. And for now, the remaining schedule looks very workable with games against Cal, Wake Forest, Duke, and Virginia Tech. And if they win out, which they definitely should, they will be in the ACC championship game, likely kicking Miami out, assuming Georgia Tech also takes care of business. It's wild to think about, but Virginia's late season push might actually land them in Charlotte. So we'll see how that goes. Moving on to Auburn versus Arkansas, and we found out who the biggest loser is this week, and it's Arkansas. Both of these teams have been terrible at closing out games all season long, constantly finding new and creative ways to lose. So this matchup really came down to who could lose harder, and the Razorbacks took the cake. They were up 21-10 at halftime, but then Auburn scored 17 points in the fourth quarter, and honestly, Auburn didn't even have to work hard for it. Arkansas basically handed the game away. They turned the ball over 4 times in a row. Every time they touched the ball in that fourth quarter was a turnover, and all of them were near midfield as well. You just can't make that kind of stuff up. So, yeah, Auburn gets the win, but the real story is that Arkansas continues to perfect the art of collapsing. All right, now let's have our lightning round. These are games that don't quite deserve a full breakdown, but definitely need to be mentioned, starting with Washington versus Illinois. And I keep picking against Illinois for a reason. They just aren't a very good team this year, and they continue to prove that. We've talked about Washington's three-headed monster on offense plenty this season, but honestly, I still don't think they're great either. And if you're holding out hope for Illinois still, don't. Hop off of that train. They are not that good. Meanwhile, Houston got a big win on the road against Arizona State. Willie Fritz has the Cougars rolling with their only loss coming to Texas Tech. The Big 12 is really starting to feel like the Big 12 again, chaotic, unpredictable, and just full of parity. And speaking of the Big 12, BYU stays undefeated after their win over Iowa State. Tough spot for the Cougars, a road game after an emotional rivalry win, and Iowa State coming off of a bye. But like I said in my preview, it's time to start taking BYU seriously. They trailed for most of the game, but they were disciplined. They forced 4 turnovers, 0 given up. That's the difference between good teams and great teams. Michigan, they took home the Paul Bunyan Trophy. It stays in Ann Arbor. Michigan handled business here, leading on that defense in that classic ground and pound style game. Meanwhile, Michigan State just continues to spiral, and there's just not much else to say there. And while there were a lot of almost upsets this week, a few teams clearly didn't get the memo because they absolutely obliterated their opponents, starting with Indiana. UCLA has clearly turned things around and shown major improvements over the past few weeks. Unfortunately for them, they ran into one of the best teams in the country. Indiana just put them in a body bag here, just pure domination. Georgia Tech, they destroyed Syracuse. Georgia Tech remains undefeated. Brent Key has this program rolling. Haynes King continues to play like a beast. And honestly, Syracuse never stood a chance. Tennessee keeps proving why they're still big brother against Kentucky. They dominate inferior opponents like this Kentucky team, but still implode against equal or better competition, kind of like what Penn State used to be. Utah, they just took out all their frustration from last week's rivalry against the Buffs here. They dominated from start to finish. And last but not least, Iowa. They are quietly becoming a silent assassin. They're the only team that managed to keep it close against Indiana this season, and they dropped 41 points on Minnesota. That's right, this is not your grandma's Hawkeyes team. They can score some serious points now, and they're not sacrificing defense to do it. So that's all for this week's video, guys. If you enjoyed, again, please make sure you like, comment, subscribe. It really helps out the channel, and we've got some huge matchups next week, so stay tuned. And as always, I'll see you next time. Peace.